All right, so for this place value lesson, we're actually going to be looking at how to multiply numbers by the powers of 10. So you'll notice here I've got 10, 100, 1000. I've got 1/10, 100, and 1000ths. So how do numbers change when we multiply by whole numbers versus when we multiply by a fraction? So one thing I'd like you to point out is that whenever you multiply by a fraction, your number always gets smaller. So these numbers should actually be much smaller than these numbers, because up here we're multiplying by much larger numbers, okay? And we can tell that these numbers are much smaller because on the number line you can actually see, or in our model here, you can actually see that those get very small, okay? So we know that 9 times 1 is still going to be 1. 9. So we know that 9 times 1 is going to be 9. The reason why is if we were to put the 9 up here, we show that 9 times 1 is just still going to be itself, okay? But one thing I want to point out is anytime you multiply by a 10, it's going to get 10 times larger. So we know that 9 times 10 is not going to be 9. In fact, we're going to move across the decimal line, and we're going to say that this is 10 times greater because we multiplied by 10. So 9 times 10 would have to be 90, because it needs to show that it's 10 times larger. Then you come down here and you get to 100. Now another way of writing 100 is to say 10 times 10. So when we use the model up here, we started with 9. 9 times 10 is 90. 9 times 10 more, which would equal 100, is going to be 900. Okay? And you may start noticing a connection as you notice the zeros when you're multiplying by multiples of 10. So now let's take a look at the next one. We have 1,000. Now another way of writing 1,000 is 10 times 10 times 10. So that's another way of writing 1,000. So we're going to use that up here because we don't have, we're going to use that up here because we have 9 times 1,000. So we say 9 times 10 is 90, times 10 more is 100, times 10 more would be 9,000. Okay? So when you multiply by larger numbers, you're going to get larger numbers. Okay? When you multiply by something below the decimal or less than 1, your numbers are actually going to get smaller. So this actually means when you multiply by 1/10, that means it's going to be 10 times smaller. When you multiply by 100, it's going to be 100 times smaller. When you multiply by 1,000, it's going to be 1,000 times smaller. Now the same rule applies. We can actually say that 1/10 times 1/10 is the same as 1/100th. And we can do the same thing here. Okay, we could say 1/110 times 1/10 times 1/10 is the same as 1,000. So we'd say that's the same as 1,000. That's the same as 1/100th, and then 1/10 is already in the lowest form, okay? So that's really important for us to notice because as we move across the decimal, we would want to go twice if we're multiplying by 100, 3 times if we're multiplying by 1,000. So let's take a look at 9. We still have our 9 here, okay? This time we're going to the opposite direction. So we're going to say that this would be taking 9 times 1/10. We're going to make it 10 times smaller, which means that 9 is now going to go into the 10ths place. So we would say that that equals 9/10. So notice it went from a 9 to 9/10, which makes it 10 times smaller. Now we're going to take 9 times 1/100th. So we're going to move it twice because we're going to go from 9 to 1/10 times 1 more tenth is going to move it over here to the hundredths place. So we're going to say that this 9 is now going to go into the hundredths place because I had to move it twice because it's 100 times smaller. So we went from a 9 to 9/10 when we multiplied by 1/10. We went from a 9 to 9/100 when we multiplied by 1/100. All right, let's do this last one. 9 times 1,000. So that means 1/10 times 1/10 times 1/10. So we're going to take our 9, multiply it times 1/10, multiply it times 1/10, and multiply it times 1/10 one more time, which is going to put that 9 1,000 times smaller. So now this 9 is really small, okay? So it's going to be 0 as my no ones, I have no tens, I have no hundreds, and I have 9 thousandths. So I want you to notice what happened. We changed this, we moved it 1 decimal place and made it 9 tenths. We moved it 2 decimal places, we changed it to 100 times smaller, which is 9 100ths, and this is 1,000 times smaller, which is going to be 9 thousandths.